bribery or, as under Cato the Elder, embracing one's wife in public. Later, under the reforms of the dictator Sulla, quaestors were made automatic members of the Senate. Most of his reforms did not survive. The Republic had no fixed bureaucracy, and collected taxes through the practice of tax farming. Government positions such as quaestor, aedile, or prefect were funded by the office holder. To prevent any citizen from gaining too much power, new magistrates were elected annually and had to share power with a colleague. For example, under normal conditions, the highest authority was held by 2 consuls. In an emergency, a temporary dictator could be appointed. Throughout the Republic, the administrative system was revised several times to comply with new demands. In the end, it proved inefficient for controlling the ever-expanding dominion of Rome, contributing to the establishment of the Roman Empire. In the early empire, the pretense of the republican form of government was maintained. The Roman emperor was portrayed as only a princeps, or first citizen, and the Senate gained legislative power and all legal authority previously held by the popular assemblies. However, the rule of the emperors became increasingly autocratic and the Senate was reduced to an advisory body appointed by the emperor. The empire did not inherit a set bureaucracy from the Republic, since the Republic did not have any permanent governmental structures apart from the Senate. The emperor appointed assistants and advisors, but the state lacked many institutions, such as a centrally planned budget. Some historians have cited this as a significant reason for the decline of the Roman Empire. Military. The early Roman army, c. 500 BC, was, like those of other contemporary city-states, influenced by Greek civilization, a citizen militia that practiced hoplite tactics. It was small. The population of free men of military age was then about 9,000, and organized in 5 classes, in parallel to the comitia centuriata, the body of citizens organized politically, with 3 providing hoplites and 2 providing light infantry. The early Roman army was tactically limited and its stance during this period was essentially defensive. 162, 163, 164. Modern replica of lowercase segmentata type armor worn in conjunction with the chainmail popular after the 1st century AD Roman tower reconstruction at Limes Taunus / Germany by the 3rd century BC. The Romans abandoned the hoplite formation in favor of a more flexible system in which smaller groups of 120, or sometimes 60, men called maniples could maneuver more independently on the battlefield. 30 maniples arranged in 3 lines with supporting troops constituted a legion totaling between 4,000 and 5,000 men. 162, 163. The early Republican legion consisted of 5 sections, each of which was equipped differently and had different places in formation. The 3 lines of manipular heavy infantry, Haestati, Principes and Triortu, a force of light infantry, Velites, and the cavalry, Equites. With the new organization came a new orientation toward the offensive and a much more aggressive posture toward adjoining city-states. 162, 163, at nominal full strength, an early Republican legion included 3,600 to 4,800 heavy infantry, several hundred light infantry, and several hundred cavalrymen. 162, 165, 166. Legions were often significantly under strength from recruitment failures or following periods of active service due to accidents, battle casualties, disease and desertion. During the Civil War, Pompey's legions in the east were at full strength because they were recently recruited, while Caesar's legions were often well below nominal strength after long active service in Gaul. This pattern also held true for auxiliary forces. 167, 168, until the late Republican period. The typical legionary was a property-owning citizen farmer from a rural area, an assiduous, who served for particular, often annual, campaigns, and who supplied his own equipment and, in the case of equites, his own mount. Harris suggests that down to 200 BC, the average rural farmer might participate in 6 or 7 campaigns. Freedmen, slaves, and urban citizens served only in rare emergencies. 170. After 200 BC, economic conditions in rural areas deteriorated as manpower needs increased, so that the property qualifications for compulsory service were gradually reduced. Beginning with Gaius Marius in 107 BC, citizens without property and some urban-dwelling citizens, proletariat, were enlisted and provided with equipment, although most legionaries continued to come from rural areas. Terms of service became continuous and long, up to 20 years if emergencies required, although 6 or 7 year terms were more typical. 171. Beginning in the 3rd century BC, legionaries were paid a stipendium. The amounts are disputed. Caesar doubled his troop payments to 225 denarii a year. Troops could anticipate booty and donatives from their commanders to reward successful campaigns and, beginning at the time of Marius, could be granted allotments of land on retirement. 162, 172. The cavalry and light infantry attached to a legion, the auxilia, were often recruited from the areas where the legion served. Caesar formed a legion, the 5th Aenordae, from non-citizens in Transalpine Gaul to serve in his campaigns in Gaul. 173. By the time of Augustus, the ideal of the citizen soldier had been abandoned and the legions had become fully professional. Ordinary legionaries received 900 sesterces a year and could expect 12,000 sesterces on retirement. 174. At the end of the Civil War, Augustus reorganized Roman military forces, discharging soldiers and disbanding legions. He retained 28 legions, distributed through the provinces of the empire. 175. During the Principate, the tactical organization of the army continued to evolve. The auxilia remained independent cohorts, and legionary troops often operated as groups of cohorts rather than as full legions. A new and versatile type of unit, the cohortes equitati, combined cavalry and legionaries in a single formation. They could be stationed at garrisons or outposts and could fight on their own as balanced small forces or combine with similar units as a larger, legion-sized force. This increase in organizational flexibility helped ensure the long-term success of Roman military forces. 176. The Emperor Gallienus, 253–268 AD, began a reorganization that created the last military structure of the late empire. Withdrawing some legionaries from the fixed bases on the border, Gallienus created mobile forces, the comitatenses or field armies, and stationed them behind and at some distance from the borders as a strategic reserve. The border troops, limitanei, stationed at fixed bases continued to be the first line of defense. The basic units of the field army were regimental, legions or auxilia for infantry and vexillations for cavalry. Nominal strengths may have been 1,200 men for infantry regiments and 600 for cavalry, but actual troop levels could have been much lower: 800 infantry and 400 cavalry. 177. Many infantry and cavalry regiments operated in pairs under the command of vicums. Field armies included regiments recruited from allied tribes and known as foederati. By 400 AD, foederati regiments had become permanently established units of the Roman army. paid and equipped by the empire, led by a Roman tribune and used just as Roman units were used. The empire also used groups of barbarians to fight along with the legions azules without integration into the field armies, under overall command of a Roman general, but led by their own officers. 177. Military leadership evolved over the course of the history of Rome. Under the monarchy, the hoplite armies were ruled by the kings. During the early and middle Roman Republic, military forces were under the command of one of the two elected consuls for the year. During the later Republic, members of the Roman senatorial elite, as part of the normal sequence of elected public offices known as the cursus honorum, would have served first as quaestor, often posted as deputies to field commanders, then as praetor. 178, 179. Julius Caesar's most talented, effective and reliable subordinate in Gaul, Titus Labienus, was recommended to him by Pompey. 180, Altar of Domitius Ahenobarbus c. 122 BC. The altar shows two Roman infantrymen equipped with long sciator and a cavalryman with Histius. All are shown wearing chainmail armor. Following the end of a term as praetor or consul, a senator might be appointed by the Senate as a procretor or proconsul, depending on the highest office held before, to govern a foreign province. More junior officers, down to but not including the level of centurion, were selected by their commanders from their own clientele or those recommended by political allies among the senatorial elite. 178, under Augustus, whose most important political priority was to place their military under a permanent and unitary command. The emperor was the legal commander of each legion but exercised that command through Algatus, legate, he appointed from the senatorial elite. In a province with a single legion, the legate commanded the legion, legatus legionis, and also served as provincial governor, while in a province with more than one legion, each legion was commanded by a legate and the legates were commanded by the provincial governor, also a legate but of high rank. 181. During the later stages of the imperial period, beginning perhaps with Diocletian, the Augustan model was abandoned. Provincial governors were stripped of military authority, and command of the armies in a group of provinces was given to generals, duces, appointed by the emperor. These were no longer members of the Roman elite but men who came up through the ranks and had seen much practical soldiering. With increasing frequency these men attempted, sometimes successfully, to usurp the positions of the emperors who had appointed them. Decreased resources, increasing political chaos and civil war eventually left the Western Empire vulnerable to attack and takeover by neighboring barbarian peoples. 182. Roman Navy. Less is known about the Roman Navy than the Roman Army. Prior to the middle of the 3rd century BC, officials known as duumviri navals commanded a fleet of 20 ships used mainly to control piracy. This fleet was given up in 278 AD and replaced by Allied forces. The First Punic War required that Rome build large fleets, and it did so largely with the assistance of and financing from allies. This reliance on allies continued to the end of the A Roman naval biome depicted in relief from the Temple of Fortuna Primigenia in Praeneste, Palastrina, 183, which was built 120 BC. Winking Sad Smiley 184, exhibited in the Pius Clementine Museum, Museo Pio Clementino, in the Vatican Museums. Roman Republic. The quinquellum was the main warship on both sides of the Punic Wars and remained the mainstay of Roman naval forces until replaced by the time of Caesar Augustus by lighter and more maneuverable vessels. 185. As compared with the triumph, the quinquellum permitted the use of a mix of experienced and inexperienced crewmen, an advantage for a primarily land-based power. and its lesser maneuverability permitted the Romans to adopt and perfect boarding tactics using a troop of about 40 marines in lieu of the ram. Ships were commanded by a navarch, a rank equal to a centurion, who was usually not a citizen. Potter suggests that because the fleet was dominated by non-Romans, the navy was considered non-Roman and allowed to atrophy in times of peace. 185. Information suggests that by the time of the late Empire, 350 AD, the Roman navy comprised several fleets including warships and merchant vessels for transport.